I believe that the Attorney General is the most important position in a president's cabinet. And if it's not the most important, it certainly is the most difficult. Whoever is our Attorney General, and it is a person that serves all of us, they have two clients. They have the president who appointed her or him, and they have the Constitution. And let me be clear that I have no objections to any president, including President Trump, appointing someone that the president is close to. President Kennedy appointed his brother. I do have a problem with any president seeing the job of Attorney General to be the person who runs, quote, my Justice Department. And that's how President Trump has characterized it, my Justice Department. So we have this dilemma with respect to coming to a conclusion in the use of the responsibility that the Senate as an institution has for the advice and consent of a cabinet member. I start from the orientation that a president should be able to pick his team, and that we should take up nominations and move on them, vote on them expeditiously. My orientation is that the president is entitled to the benefit of the doubt, but not to a blank check. What's also difficult for me with respect to this appointment is that, in my view, Pam Bondi is accomplished, incompetent, unqualified. I have great respect for her work as a county prosecutor in Florida, and I have great respect for her work as Attorney General in the state of Florida. And I have great respect for the fact that, as a woman, she made that decision to run for Attorney General and had to overcome pretty significant odds in order to win that position. And I also remember, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Ranking Member, she had great testimony from people that she worked with. And I think both you and I have a great deal of respect for folks who have a leadership position and treat their subordinates with great respect and have the affection and confidence. And that came through in the testimony of people who had worked with Ms. Bondi. My grave concern is really about President Trump and what he is clearly demanding of the person, whoever it is he has, and now it's Ms. Bondi. What the president is demanding, and that clearly is a loyalty oath to him, as opposed to a demand for straightforward, candid advice, including if the president is asking something to be done, like a prosecution of a political adversary, that the answer, Mr. President, has to be no. That's what the president is demanding. Now, we can argue on both sides about whether that's the case, but the evidence is overwhelming. The question that I've asked a number of nominees, including Mr. Patel and including Ms. Bondi, is who won the 2020 election. And it's pretty clear that the president's team, in preparing folks for that inevitable question, came up with an acceptable answer. The acceptable answer is that President Biden was the president. President Biden was certified. No one could just say the straightforward, President Biden won. You know, in the closest election in our history, Bush v. Gore, after the Supreme Court made its decision, not only did Al Gore accept the outcome, but Democrats did, Americans did. And that was pre-January 6th, when we all relied on the guardrail in the Constitution that there would be a commitment to a peaceful transfer of power, and that there would be renunciation of violence as a means of persuasion in the outcome of an election. January 6th did change that. There was an attack on the Capitol. Many of us were here. That was inspired by President Trump. He invited people to come. It'll be wild. And it was provoked because the president used the enormous authority he had, the enormous credibility he had with people who supported him, to begin peddling the stop the steal narrative. The election was stolen. And President Trump has never, ever given up on that. As far as he's concerned, and to every person, every audience, that election was stolen. And people that were going to work in his administration in a vetting process had to answer that question in the way that was acceptable to President, then newly elected President Trump. That's not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable. President Biden won. President Trump won this last election. I didn't vote for him, but I can say it. I can acknowledge it and do the best I can as a member of the minority party. But we now have a president who is not allowing a person who has to have a dual loyalty to him, yes, but to the Constitution, to make it clear before that person is nominated for a law enforcement position that they accept his narrative of what happened in 2020. It's really dangerous, in my view, for our country. You know, the president has gone on, much to my regret, intensifying that concern that many of us have as to whether there'll be an adherence to the rule of law. In an extraordinary first 2 weeks, the president has gone on, it's my opinion, but a lot of courts support it, of a rampage of illegality. This is a serious threat to our country. Let me start with the impoundment. You know, basic civics. Article 1 branch, that's the U.S. Senate and U.S. House, has authority over appropriations and spending. The executive can propose, and we can consider an appropriation request. The president can reject an appropriations bill that the Congress passes with a veto. But what the president can't do is pick and choose where he feels like spending or just disregarding the appropriations passed by the Congress of the United States, and he's doing that. The impoundment is patently illegal, not even close, and what's clear to me is the president doesn't care, because if the impoundment causes enough havoc that affected agencies will either be destroyed or severely damaged. Let me give a couple examples. That impoundment notice went out. Wells River Community Health Center in Vermont. It provides health care to really poor Vermonters, and they do an incredible job. They have a cash balance that allows them to stay in business for 0 to 5 days. That's it. The impoundment notice comes in. Literally, they show up to work and it says, you shut down. You can't open up tomorrow. Those folks running that organization don't have the money to pay the salaries of anyone, the doctors, the receptionists, the medical providers. We see what's happening at USAID. We're shutting you down. The doors are locked. People show up for work, they can't get in. That's illegal. Unconstitutional, as I see it. And the administration, the president, has made a clear decision that he doesn't care. He's not going to worry about the niceties. Things that restrained the Republican and Democratic presidents before, namely adherence to the law, a recognition of their responsibility to preserve a tool that has been a safeguard for our democracy through both Republican and Democratic administrations. Those rules don't apply to him. And then we've seen that he's delegated authority to a non-elected billionaire, it's Mr. Musk, and told him basically to go wild with the federal government, do what you want, go where you want. And in one of the most astonishing things, Musk sent over 5 kids. One of them is 19, he can't drink in Vermont. And 4 early 20-year-old folks. And they march into the Treasury Secretary, basically, of the United States, the successor to Alexander Hamilton, a man I respect, by the way, Mr. Besant, and the person who ran the payment system, and said, we're in charge. That's basically what they did. And then they got access to the computers, which means they have your Social Security in mind. They have information about our taxes. Every individual in this country, their privacy has now been put in jeopardy. I mean, just think if this were the private sector. Let's say you're Jamie Dimon and you run a major financial institution, JP Morgan, and 5 kids show up at your bank and they say, hey, Mr. Musk sent us. Give us access to the computers. And they have access to all the individual information, company information of the folks who work with JP Morgan. That's what happened. And it's not really apparent to all the American people what is happening. It's the folks who are directly impacted by this, the folks at USAID who don't have a job, the folks at Wells River Clinic who are operating on a marginal, on the tightest of margins, that have suffered and don't know whether they'll be able to keep the lights on. It's the woman, the mom, who had finally, after months and months of trying, a dental appointment through Medicaid that had it canceled arbitrarily and abruptly. So those individuals are feeling it, and this is going to ripple out to more and more Americans seeing what's happening. But we need an attorney general who will share my shock at a president acting in such a lawless way. So the fact is, frankly, I don't think President Trump ever in the world would place a value on having an attorney general who's willing to tell him, Mr. President, no, you can't get appointed unless you pass the test. And the test was on full display, both with Mr. Patel and Ms. Bondi, in their inability to answer the basic question, who won the 2020 election. So my concern is not that they, quote, get the answer right. My concern is they get their profound responsibility is first and foremost to the Constitution and the rule of law. And the president is not looking for anyone other than someone who's going to give him the fealty that he demands when these questions arise. And what we're seeing with the president in these first 2 weeks of his term is that there is no restraint. The rule of law is for suckers. He's going to break things, and whatever damage is done is not his problem. And the problem is, it's a lot of really innocent and good Americans who are being affected by this. Doctors and nurses, moms whose children get Medicaid help, lawyers who dedicated their career to civil rights or environmental protection. You know, there's a cruelty with the way in which the president has acted. It's almost a casual cruelty. It just doesn't matter. So I'm looking for some confidence that the checks and balances that are required, that we can build up. And frankly, there's a major question that we face as a United States Senator, and each of us as an individual senator. I believe, at least to exercise our judgment. We won't agree necessarily, and we may come to a different judgment about how best we can do what I think each of us is required to do, and that is protect the institutional responsibility of the United States Senate to be an independent and separate branch of government, and to adhere to the importance of the separation of powers, and that this institution has a fundamental responsibility to the American people to be a check and balance. And there's 100 of us here, and we may have 100 different opinions as to when it is that we should say no. But my hope is that every single one of us will accept that it is our responsibility to make that judgment and not just passively submit to whatever action the president is sending our way. With that, I yield back.